If you love classic cars, then Donald loves you.
You know, it's a really interesting thing when you think you know what something is. It seems very, very familiar, and yet it's really not quite what you first supposed. And that's the case with the car I'm driving today. It's a mid-80s Mercedes 107 convertible. And we all know these cars, are very familiar with these cars, sort of grew up with these cars in the US. Very, very, very popular, both as new cars, new luxury cruisers, and as collectible cars. Everyone knows the 350 SL, the 450 SL, the 560 SL here in the US, but what I'm driving is something slightly different. Now, the 350, 450, and 560 would certainly feel right at home here, driving down Bellevue Avenue on a beautiful spring day, the top down, the sun shining, nice and sedate. Of course, the first clue that there's something slightly different about this car can be seen in the console, where next to the very familiar Mercedes serrated shifter is a little switch. And right now the switch is towards me and in the E mode, but I can switch it to S or Sport. And then interesting things start to happen. The true character of this car is frankly revealed when you look on the trunk lid and you see the numbers which don't seem to be in place in this particular body style. What I'm driving is not a 350 SL, it's not a 450 SL, it's not a 560, it's a 500 SL. This is a car that was not sold in the US market when new. And the difference between this and your everyday 450 is dramatic. People don't often remember that the 107 series of SLs were, when new, very capable rally cars in the SLC or coupe version. And just like the 230 SLs before, that were also rally cars and did very well in that type of competition, people don't think of these cars in competition. The 500 SL was the answer to a question that European enthusiasts had long wanted. A car with a Mercedes build quality, effortless power, and a little less of the weight of what these cars, nicknamed the Panzerwagens, had to offer. Instead of the 160 horsepower of a 1986 450 SL, this 1986 500 SL has 246 horsepower. That, allied with the considerable weight savings, makes this car feel like a very, very different car than your everyday 450 SL. It gives up none of that Mercedes typical bank vault quality, and this is viewed by many as the best period of Mercedes, when cars were just built and engineered for what they needed to be, not for what they had to sell for. And I remember quite vividly driving a rally in Italy with a friend's borrowed 500 SL, and beautiful roads around the hills around one of the lakes in northern Italy. And unfortunately, it had rained. So whenever I put the power down, the rear end complained, slipped out a little, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna have to be a little careful here. Fortunately, I've got a nice dry day here in Rhode Island, so I don't have those particular worries. But the power comes on and goes. Once you get this car up to about 3,500 RPM, it really wants to sail up to $5,000 and more. This is a very, very atypical feel from what you might expect in one of these cars. And of course, the confidence that a Mercedes gives you is really notable in the handling. This is not a small car, it's not a particularly light car, but it feels really responsive. It's one of those sort of curious things that today many manufacturers build high performance cars that they also think could be used as great cruising cars. But I think few accomplished what Mercedes accomplished with this car back in the 1980s. You can just waft along here, along the ocean, as if you're just going on a golf holiday, or you can put your foot in it and really make the car sing. That, to me, is sort of the ideal all-rounder, and this car makes just that kind of ideal all-rounder. The clock in this car is showing 14,000 miles, so also by Mercedes standards, this car is just off the showroom floor. So you can just imagine spending 100,000 or 200,000 miles with this car might be like. I'm not quite sure what heaven is, but right now in the sun, next to the ocean, in this 500 SL, I've got to be awfully close. In the age of modern cars with these tiny diameter wheels and 2.5 turns lock to lock, and also there's something very familiar and reassuring about this giant Mercedes helm and the fact that you just lean into the turns like a really superb yacht. This car just responds. And while you use all of your arms and upper body to do it, the car actually requires very little effort. There's a perfect blend of lightness and connection. You know, I find this in some Jaguars of the 1950s and 60s, but to find it in a performance luxury car of the 1980s is really special. And when we think about collecting and how it moves forward, and cars of the 80s now are really old cars. They're 40 years old. And yet, you can live with this car every day if you want it, and it demands no sacrifices or compromises for a modern driver. And I've said this before about cars of this period. Once manufacturers had discovered the way to work with emissions controls and regulations, I think they really got it right. This is the dawn of the perfect analog internal combustion car. And this is a very, very satisfying one.